First time I noticed it, I didn't think it was supernatural. I thought it was a staffing problem. I'd been working the overnight shift at the Welland Motor Lodge for about 3 weeks. It sits on Route 20 outside Ashtabula, Ohio, not the lakeside, the inland side. Set back from the road behind a parking lot that could hold 40 cars, but rarely held more than 6. 2 stories, exterior corridors, 28 rooms, a vending area, a small breakfast nook that closed at 10 a.m., and a front desk built from wood grain laminate that had started peeling at the corners before I was born. The owner was a man named Garza. He lived 40 minutes south and visited twice a week, always during the day. I never overlapped with him. My shift ran from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. I replaced a woman named Trish, who had apparently quit without notice. And before Trish, there had been a man named Dale who'd worked the overnight for several years and then retired, or left, or simply stopped showing up. The accounts varied depending on who I asked. The daytime clerk was a woman named Sandy, who was 61 and had been there longer than anyone, and who communicated with me primarily through post-it notes left on the monitor. The job was simple. Check in any late arrivals, handle noise complaints, walk the building once at 2 a.m. and once at 5 a.m. Don't fall asleep. Log anything unusual. The usual unusual things were lockouts, plumbing complaints, someone trying to smoke in a non-smoking room, or a guest asking for extra towels at 3 in the morning because they'd spilled something they didn't want to describe. The guest book sat on the left side of the front desk, between a brochure rack and a pen holder shaped like a boot. It was an old-fashioned ledger, the kind with a green cloth cover and lined pages, each row broken into columns. Date, name, room number, number of guests, license plate, check-in time, check-out time. Sandy used it as a backup to the computer system. Every guest who checked in during the day was logged both digitally and in the book. My instructions were to do the same for late arrivals. After my first week, I started noticing that the guest book sometimes had entries I hadn't made. The first time, it was small. I came in at 11, relieved Sandy, sat down, and opened the book to log the current date. There was already an entry for that night. Room 11, 1 guest. No name, just a dash. No license plate. Check-in time listed as 1:40 a.m. I hadn't checked anyone into room 11. It was 10 past 11. 1:40 hadn't happened yet. I assumed Sandy had pre-logged a reservation. We occasionally got calls from people who knew they'd be arriving late and wanted to confirm a room. It wasn't standard to write it in the book before they arrived. But Sandy had her own way of doing things. And she'd been there long enough to do them however she liked. I made a mental note to ask her and moved on. At 1:40 a.m., no one checked into room 11. I walked past it during my 2 a.m. round. The door was closed. The light was off. The room was supposed to be vacant. It wasn't on the active roster in the computer. I moved on. In the morning, I left Sandy a post-it asking whether she'd pre-logged a reservation for room 11 the night before. When I came back that evening, she'd left a post-it in return. It said, "Didn't book 11. Maybe Dale's old shorthand? Ignore it." I ignored it. 4 nights later, it happened again. I opened the book at the start of my shift and found an entry for room 19. 1 guest, no name. Check-in time, 3:15 a.m. The handwriting was not Sandy's. It wasn't mine. It was small and neat and used a slightly different dash longer, with a faint upward slant at the end. I hadn't seen it before. At 3:15, no one arrived. Room 19 was vacant on the computer. I checked the door during my 5 a.m. walk. Closed, dark, silent. This time I didn't leave a post-it. I just drew a thin pencil line through the entry and wrote NCA next to it, no corresponding arrival. That was a notation Sandy had taught me during training. If someone no-showed on a reservation, you marked it NCA and moved on. It kept the ledger clean. The next morning, I noticed the pencil line was gone. Not erased, there were no graphite smudges, no roughness on the paper. The line simply wasn't there. My NCA was also gone. The entry remained. Room 19. One guest. 3:15 a.m. The dash where the name should be. As if I had never touched it. That was the night I started paying closer attention. Over the next 2 weeks, it happened 6 more times. The pattern was irregular but consistent in its features. Always one guest. Always a room that was vacant on the computer system. Always a specific check-in time written in advance. Never a name, only the dash. And the handwriting was always the same. Small, unhurried, precise, with that slightly ascending dash. I started a private log. I used a pocket notebook I kept in my jacket, not the guest book itself, because I'd already learned the guest book had a way of correcting my corrections. In the pocket notebook, I recorded the date, the room number, and the listed check-in time for each self-written entry. Then I made a point of being near that room at that time. Nothing ever happened. No headlights in the lot. No footsteps on the exterior corridor. No door opening or closing. The room stayed dark. The guest book's entries simply sat there, like minutes from a meeting I hadn't attended. I brought it up with Sandy directly during one of our rare overlaps. She was running late. I was running early. And we had 10 minutes together at the desk. I showed her the entries. She flipped through the pages slowly, adjusted her glasses, and said, "That's Dale's writing." She said it without alarm. She said it the way you'd say, "Oh, that's the neighbor's cat." "Dale used to do something like this," she said. He'd log rooms that he said were occupied, even though the system had them empty. Garza talked to him about it once. Dale said he was just keeping accurate records. Garza told him to stop, and he mostly did. But sometimes I'd come in and find 1 or 2 in the book. I'd just leave them. "Dale retired," I said. "Dale left," Sandy said. "About 7 months ago." "So, who's writing them now?" Sandy closed the book and set it back in its place. "I don't write them. You don't write them. Nobody else is here at night." She looked at me over her glasses. "I just leave them." I left them. For about a week, I left them. I came in, I opened the book. I saw the entries, sometimes 1, sometimes none. Once 3 in a single night, and I did my job around them. I checked in the real guests. I made the real walks. I answered the real calls. The book filled itself in beside me, like a coworker doing their own quiet task at the same desk. But I couldn't stop reading them. That was the thing. The entries were simple room number, guest count, time, but they were specific. And the rooms they named were always rooms I would walk past on my rounds. So each night, at 2 a.m. and again at 5, I'd move through the corridors and pass room 11 or room 19 or room 6 or room 24. And I'd know the book had claimed someone was inside. The doors were always closed. The lights were always off. And I'd pause not long, just a half-second more than I paused at any other door, and listen. I never heard anything. Not at first. The first time I heard something, it was room 6. The book had logged it for 12:50 a.m. I was walking the second-floor corridor at 2, and room 6 is on the ground floor at the far end, beneath the stairwell. I wasn't even near it. But as I passed the stairwell, I heard faintly, from below, the sound of a faucet running. A bathroom sink. Brief, maybe 5 seconds, then off. Room 6 was vacant on the system. No one had checked in. I went downstairs and stood in front of the door. The light was off. I pressed my ear to the surface and heard nothing. No movement, no television, no breathing, no running water. I held the master key in my hand for almost a full minute. Then I went back to the desk. In the morning, I checked room 6. I let myself in with the master key during the last 10 minutes of my shift, before Sandy arrived. The room was empty. The beds were made. The bathroom was dry sink, tub, floor. No water spots, no condensation on the mirror. The little paper band across the toilet seat was intact. The room hadn't been entered. But the guest book still had the entry. Room 6. One guest. 12:50 a.m. The dash. After that, I heard things 3 more times in 10 days. Always small things. A faucet once. A drawer sliding shut once. The particular creak of a motel bed, the sound of someone shifting their weight during the night once. Outside room 22, at 5 a.m. Each time, I was walking my rounds. Each time the room was one the book had logged. Each time, I stopped and listened, and the sound didn't repeat. And each time, I checked the room at the end of my shift and found it untouched, undisturbed, sealed in its little envelope of disuse. I want to be precise about my mental state during this period. I was not terrified. I was not losing sleep. I was mildly unsettled in the way you get when a fixture in your daily environment starts behaving unpredictably, like a car that occasionally makes a sound you can't locate. I was mostly functional. I did my job. I went home in the mornings and slept and ate and paid my bills and came back. The strangeness of the guest book was a problem I hadn't solved, but it wasn't yet a problem that had consequences. The consequences started with room 9. Room 9 was a ground floor room near the middle of the building, directly below room 21. It had been vacant for several days. On a Tuesday night in late February, I opened the guest book at the start of my shift and found the usual entry. Room 9, one guest, 2:20 a.m. I logged it in my pocket notebook and went about my work. At 2:15, I began my walk. I came down the exterior stairwell and turned along the ground floor corridor. When I reached room 9, I stopped. The light was on. Not the overhead, the bedside lamp. I could see it through the curtain. A warm, dull glow. The kind that makes a motel room look like a lit aquarium from outside. The room was vacant on the system. No one had checked in with me. No one had checked in with Sandy. I stood there for a long time. Then I heard the bedside lamp click off. The room went dark. And from inside, I heard a sound that I need to describe carefully because it was not dramatic and it was not loud. It was the sound of someone pulling a blanket up. That soft friction of cotton on cotton, the slight rustle. The sound a person makes when they've turned off the light and are settling into bed. I stood outside room 9 until 2:35 and heard nothing else. Then I went back to the desk and sat with my hands flat on the laminate and breathed slowly until my shift ended. I did not check room 9 in the morning. I couldn't. Not because I was afraid, though I was, but because I realized something that restructured the situation entirely. If I opened the door and found the room empty and the bed untouched, the event would remain impossible, and I could continue treating it as a malfunction, a hallucination, a thing to manage. But if I opened the door and found the bed disturbed, sheets pulled back, pillow dented, the impression of a body in the mattress, then the entries in the guest book were real. Someone had been staying in these rooms. Someone the system didn't log. Someone I couldn't see. And I had been walking past them for weeks. I left room 9 unchecked. Sandy would clean it during her shift, or the part-time housekeeper would. Whatever was in there would be made and folded and smoothed over. And I would never have to know. But I did know. That was the problem. I already knew. The guest book continued. Every few nights, another entry. Room 14, room 3, room 26. Always one guest, always the dash, always a precise time. And now that I was listening with a different quality of attention, not checking for sounds, but listening for habitation, I began to hear them. Faint sounds behind the doors the book had marked. The creak of a bed frame. A cough once, so brief I almost missed it. The soft thud of someone setting a shoe down on the floor. They were living sounds. Ordinary sounds. The kind you hear in any occupied motel if you walk the corridors at night. There was nothing monstrous in them. That was what made them so difficult. If I had heard growling or scraping or something unmistakably wrong, I could have called someone. I could have framed it as a break-in, a squatter, a safety issue. But what I was hearing was simply occupancy people sleeping, people using the bathroom, people existing quietly inside rooms they had apparently checked into through a ledger that wrote itself. I started watching the parking lot. I set up near the window behind the desk and kept a careful count of every car in the lot, cross-referencing each one with the license plates logged in the computer for real, checked-in guests. The numbers always matched. There were no extra cars, no unfamiliar vehicles. Whoever was staying in the book's rooms didn't drive. I watched the corridors from the desk. The Welland had a single security camera mounted above the front entrance, and it covered part of the lot and the near edge of the ground floor corridor. I asked Garza through Sandy, through a chain of post-its, whether there were other cameras. There were not. The single camera had been installed after a theft from the vending area 4 years ago and had never been expanded. I reviewed the footage for 3 nights. I watched from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. at 4 times speed, looking for anyone walking to the rooms the book had logged. I saw myself making my rounds. I saw a real guest step out to smoke at 1:20 a.m. I saw a cat cross the lot. I did not see anyone enter or exit the rooms the book had marked. This should have been where I escalated. I should have told Garza directly. I should have told someone. But the problem with escalation was the same problem I'd had with room 9. Saying it out loud would require me to commit to one version of reality or the other. Either I was hearing sounds in empty rooms and seeing handwriting appear in a book, which made me someone who was experiencing things that don't happen, or the motel was hosting invisible guests, which made me someone who believed something that can't be true. Neither version of me was going to keep this job, and I needed this job. The pay was low, but the hours let me take classes during the day. And I was 11 credits from finishing a degree I'd started 5 years ago. I couldn't afford to become unreliable. So I kept working, and I kept reading the book, and the book kept filling itself in. In March, 2 things changed. The first change was that the entries started including names. I opened the book on a Wednesday night and found the usual entry for the night room 17. One guest, 4:10 a.m. But instead of the dash, there was a name. L. Morrow. The same handwriting, the same small, precise letters. But a name. I stared at it for a long time. In all the weeks of self-writing entries, the name field had always been that ascending dash. Now there was a person, or at least the notation of one. The next night, another name. Room 4, E. Palak. One guest, 1 a.m. The night after that, 2 entries. Room 10, F. Durst, 11:45 p.m. Room 23, M. Cahill, 3:30 a.m. I wrote them all in my pocket notebook. I searched the names on my phone. Nothing. Common enough names, but nothing that corresponded to any recent news, any obituary, any Ashtabula connection I could find. I checked the motel's computer system going back as far as it would let me, about 18 months. None of these names appeared in the digital records. But I didn't have access to anything before that. The system had been upgraded 18 months ago. Everything prior existed only in the guest book itself, and in whatever paper records Garza kept in his office, which was locked. The second change in March was worse. I was making my 2 a.m. walk on a Thursday. The book had logged room 12 that night, and one guest, our day, 12:30 a.m. I came along the ground floor corridor, past room 10, past room 11, and reached room 12. I paused, as I always did now, and listened. The television was on. Not loud, just the low murmur of voices and the tonal shift of a program changing scenes. I could see the faintest flicker of blue-white light at the base of the curtain. Someone was inside, watching TV at 2 in the morning, the way any motel guest might. I kept walking. I made it to the end of the corridor, turned, and started back. When I passed room 12 again, I glanced at the door. It was open, not wide cracked, about 4 inches. The interior was dark now. The television was off. Through the gap, I could see the near edge of the closest bed and a thin slice of carpet. And then, from inside, a voice said, "Excuse me." It was soft, unhurried, polite. The voice of someone getting a clerk's attention, gendered, I think, male, older but only barely. It was the kind of voice you hear through walls, present but indistinct. "Excuse me," the voice said again. "Could I get a second pillow?" I stopped walking. I did not look at the gap in the door. I looked straight ahead, at the exterior wall of the corridor, at the painted cinder block, at a small crack in the surface that I'd walked past 100 times. I fixed my eyes on that crack, and I breathed. "Thank you," the voice said, as if I'd answered. The door clicked shut. I went back to the desk and I sat down, and I did not move for 2 hours. I did not walk the 5 a.m. round. I did not leave the desk until Sandy arrived at 7. When she walked in, she took one look at me and said, "Bad night." I said, "Do you know anyone named Arde?" Sandy set her purse down. She took off her coat. She was quiet for a moment that went on long enough for me to understand she was deciding something. "I don't know the name," she said, "but I know what's happening." She told me about Dale. Not the official story, not the retirement, not the vague departure. The real version. Dale had worked the overnight shift for almost 6 years. He was quiet, reliable, competent. He'd started noticing the guest book entries early on within the first few months. He'd gone through the same progression I had: confusion, investigation, denial, accommodation. But Dale had gone further. Dale had started servicing the rooms. Sandy said it carefully, without judgment, the way you'd describe someone else's coping strategy. Dale had noticed the sounds. He'd noticed the lights. He'd noticed the entries filling in with greater specificity names, check-in times, sometimes even a listed checkout time. And at some point, he decided that if the motel had guests the system didn't account for, those guests still deserved clean towels. He'd started leaving fresh towels outside the doors the book had marked. He'd stocked the rooms with soap and shampoo before his shift, using the master key. He'd checked the thermostat. Once, Sandy said, she'd come in for her morning shift and found a note Dale had left on the desk. Room 22 asked for a late checkout. Don't clean until noon. Sandy had checked room 22. It was empty. It had been empty. She'd cleaned it at 8:30 and said nothing. Dale was taking care of them, Sandy said. That's how he understood it. He said they were guests. He said the book was just doing its job. He said the motel had more capacity than the computer showed. And the book was the older system. And the older system knew more. What did Garza say? Garza doesn't know. I never told him. Dale asked me not to. Why did Dale leave? Sandy adjusted her glasses again. She picked up the pen holder, the one shaped like a boot, turned it in her hands, and set it down. One of them checked out, she said, through the book. The entry had a checkout time. 7 a.m. Dale watched the door of the room at 7. He said it opened by itself, stayed open for about 10 seconds, and closed. And when he went in to clean, the bed had been slept in. The towels had been used. There was a wet ring on the bathroom counter where a glass had been. Everything you'd see after a normal stay. She paused. He said he found a tip on the nightstand. $2, folded under the TV remote. That's when he left? No, that's when he started leaving mints on the pillows. I almost laughed. I didn't. He left, Sandy said, because one night the book logged his name. She let that sit. Room 7. One guest. D. Kresge. That was Dale's name, Dale Kresge. Check-in time was 3 a.m. He was sitting at the desk when he opened the book and saw it. He finished the shift. He came back the next night. The entry was still there. Checkout time had been filled in. Permanent. Sandy looked at me. He left the next morning, didn't give notice, didn't pick up his last check. I packed up his things from behind the desk and mailed them to his address, and the package came back undeliverable. I don't know where he is. I asked, "Is room 7 occupied?" The system says no. What does the book say? I don't read the book anymore, Sandy said. I stopped reading it when Dale left. I do my entries in the computer only. I keep the book on the desk because Garza expects it to be there, and I don't open it. Whatever it's doing, it does on its own, and I suggest you do the same. That was her advice. Stop reading the book. I tried. For 4 nights, I didn't open it. I worked my shift. I checked in the real guests. I logged them in the computer only, and I left the green cloth cover closed. I still walked my rounds. I still heard the sounds, the faucets, the creaks, the televisions, fainter now maybe, or maybe I was just listening, less hard. I did my job. I didn't look. On the 5th night, I was checking in. Met a real guest, a woman driving through to Erie, tired, paying cash, room for 1. And she looked at the guest book and said, "Oh, do you want me to sign in?" "It's not necessary," I said. "The computer handles it." "I don't mind," she said. "I like old-fashioned places." She reached across the desk, opened the book, and picked up a pen. I watched her face change. She didn't say anything alarming. She just kind of stopped. The way you stop when you open a menu and it's in a language you don't read. She looked at the page. She looked at me. She looked at the page again. "It's already full," she said. "What?" "Today's page. It's already full. All the lines are filled in." She turned the book so I could see it. I looked. I had to. And she was right. The page for that date, every single row was filled. Names, room numbers, check-in times. Every room in the motel. All 28. All 1 guest each. All with names. All with times staggered through the night. From 11:15 p.m. to 6:45 a.m. 28 entries in that small, precise handwriting. Every room was logged as occupied, including the room I'd just given her. Her entry in the book read, "Room 15, 1 guest, K. Weiss, 11:22 p.m. Her name was Karen Weiss. She'd told me when she checked in. The book already had it. I closed the book. I told her the page was from earlier that week, and the dates had smudged. I told her I'd log her in the computer, and she was all set. She accepted this without difficulty, took her key card, and walked to room 15. I watched her go. Then I opened the book again and went through every entry on the page. I recognized some of the names from previous nights: L. Morrow, E. Palak, M. Cahill. Others were new. I wrote every one of them down in my pocket notebook. Then I turned back 1 page. Full, every line. 28 entries. I turned back another. Full, another, full. I started flipping. Every page, going back weeks, was fully filled. Not just the nights when I'd noticed stray entries every single night. The book showed a fully occupied motel. 28 rooms, 28 guests, every night, without interruption, for as far back as the pages went. And scattered among the names I didn't recognize were names I did not from the book's old entries, but from the computer system, real guests. People who had checked in at the desk with credit cards and driver's licenses and cars in the lot. They were in the book too. They were listed alongside the others, in the same handwriting, as if there were no difference between them. As if a woman driving to Erie and whatever occupied room 6 at 1 in the morning were the same kind of guest. I closed the book. I turned on the exterior light. I walked outside and stood in the parking lot and counted the cars. There were 4, including mine. The motel had 4 real guests that night. The book had 28. I walked the corridors. All of them, both floors, every door. It was 12:30 a.m. The 4 occupied rooms, the real ones, the ones in the computer, showed the usual signs. Light under the door, a car parked nearby, the low hum of climate control set to someone's preference. The other 24 rooms were dark and silent. Except they weren't. Not all of them. As I walked, slowly, I heard things behind the doors I had been hearing things behind for weeks. But tonight, there were more. Not louder, just more frequent. More rooms. A cough here, a faucet there. The shift of weight on a bed. The quiet click of a lamp switch. A toilet flushing 2 doors down, while I stood in the corridor holding my breath. 24 rooms, 24 sets of small, living sounds. The motel was full. I went back inside. I sat at the desk. I looked at the guest book. And for the first time, I understood what Dale must have understood, what Sandy had decided, strategically, never to understand. The guest book wasn't filling itself in. It was doing what guest books do. It was keeping a record of the guests. All of them. The fact that I couldn't see most of them. The fact that the computer didn't log them. The fact that they didn't drive cars or walk through the front door. Those were my limitations, not the book's. The book was more accurate than I was. It always had been. I worked the rest of the shift in a state I can only describe as a kind of aggressive normalcy. I did my job. I checked in, no one else. At 2 a.m., I walked my rounds and heard the sounds and kept moving. At 5 a.m., I walked again. The motel was quiet by then, the deep quiet of a building where everyone is finally asleep. Everyone. At 6:45, I was back at the desk. I opened the book to the current page. The checkout times were beginning to fill themselves in. Room 3, 6:30 a.m. Room 19, 6:45 a.m. Room 26, 7 a.m. One by one, the book was logging departures. I walked to room 3. I stood in front of the door at 6:50 a.m. The book said the guest had left at 6:30. I used the master key. The room was empty. The bed had been slept in. The left side, the sheets pulled down and creased, the pillow bearing the impression of a head. The bathroom mirror had a faint haze of steam on its lower half. A damp towel hung on the rack. The little soap bar on the sink counter had been used wet, with a thumbprint of lather on its surface. On the nightstand, folded beneath the TV remote, were $2 bills. I stood in that room for a long time. Then I remade the bed. I replaced the towel. I wiped the mirror. I put out a fresh soap bar. I picked up the $2 and put them in my pocket. I went back to the desk and waited for Sandy. When she arrived, I said, "I understand now." She looked at me and didn't ask what I understood. She just nodded. "Dale was right," I said. "They're guests." "I don't want to know," Sandy said. "I specifically don't want to know. I've been here 9 years, and I've specifically not known for 7 of them. And that has worked for me. Okay? Do what you need to do. I won't stop you. I won't report you. But I don't want to hear about it, and I don't want to see it. I respected that. I still do. Over the next several weeks, I began servicing the rooms. Not all of them. I couldn't manage 24 turnovers in addition to my desk duties. But I started with the rooms the book listed as newly occupied each night. I'd check the book at the start of my shift, identify which rooms had new entries names I hadn't seen on previous pages, and I'd prepare those rooms. Fresh towels, full soap and shampoo, thermostat set to 68. Bedside lamp left on, because I'd noticed the book's guests often had check-in times after midnight, and it seemed like the right thing to do. Leave a light on for someone arriving late. The sounds changed, or rather, my experience of them changed. I was no longer hearing intrusions. I was hearing habitation. The motel was doing what motels do housing travelers, and I was doing what clerks do, making their stay bearable. I found the tips. Not in every room, not every morning, but often enough. Always $2, always folded, always under the TV remote. I kept them separately from my own money, in a jar in my apartment. I don't know why. It seemed disrespectful to spend them, though I couldn't have told you who I'd be disrespecting. I began reading the names. I wrote them down every night. I started noticing patterns. Some names recurred, Morrow appeared every 10 to 12 days, always in room 11. E. Palak stayed in room 4 regularly. There were what I came to think of as regulars, and there were single-night stays that never repeated. Just like a real motel. Just like any motel on a highway that serves both long-haul travelers passing through and local workers who need a place for the week. I never tried to look them up again. It felt invasive. If you were a front desk clerk and you Googled your living guests by name, that would be a violation. I extended the same courtesy. In April, I found something in room 7. Room 7 was Dale's room, the one the book had logged under his name, D. Kresge. Permanent check-in, no checkout. I had avoided it deliberately. I'd serviced the rooms on either side of it and walked past it quickly during rounds. But the towels in room 7 hadn't been changed in months, maybe longer. If Dale's entry was real in the same way the other entries were real, then someone was in there. And they hadn't had fresh towels since before I started. I unlocked the door at 3 in the morning. The light was off. I stood in the doorway and said quietly, "I'm just bringing towels." I don't know why I said it. I don't know who I was talking to. The room was dark and still, but it didn't feel empty. It felt like a room where someone was sleeping and I was trying not to wake them. I set the towels on the bathroom counter. I replaced the soap. As I turned to leave, I noticed something on the desk, the small writing desk that sits by the window in every room at the Wellen, wedged between the dresser and the wall. There was a notebook on it, a pocket notebook like mine. I recognized it because it was the same brand, the same black cover, the same elastic band. It was Dale's. It had to be. His private log, like mine. I picked it up. I opened it to the first page. His handwriting, larger than the book's, sloppier, human, filled the lines. He had done exactly what I'd done. Logged the entries. tracked the rooms, noted the sounds. The progression was the same: confusion, investigation, accommodation, service. But Dale's notes went further than mine had gone. In the later pages, his entries became less observational and more conversational. Not that he was writing dialogue, but his notes shifted from third person to second. Instead of room 11 occupied per book, faucet heard 2:15 a.m., he'd write, Al Lamaro back in 11. Left extra towels since she stays a while. Hope the thermostat is okay. He was talking to them. In his notes, in his head, in the quiet of the overnight shift. He had come to know them by their patterns and preferences, the way any long-term desk clerk comes to know regulars. Not by sight, not by conversation, by the small evidence of their stays, which rooms they preferred, how long they stayed, what they used, what they left behind. The last entry in Dale's notebook was dated the night before he disappeared. It read, Book has me in 7. Check-in 3 a.m. Permanent. Don't know what to think about that. Been sitting here an hour. Room's ready. I made the bed this morning. Fresh towels. Turned the lamp on. If I go in, I think I stay. If I don't go in, I think I go. Either way, something closes. Below that, in smaller writing, it's not a threat. I want to be clear about that. It's an invitation. It just happens to be one I can't come back from. And below that, maybe that's what check-in always was. The notebook ended there. I set it back on the desk, exactly where I'd found it. And I left room 7 and closed the door behind me. I stood in the corridor. The motel was quiet. The air was cold. April in Ashtabula is still winter, really, and I could see my breath in the exterior corridor. The lights hummed. The parking lot was nearly empty. The building sat around me. 2 stories of cinder block and numbered doors, plain and ordinary and full. I went back to the desk. I opened the guest book. I turned to tonight's page. 28 entries, 28 rooms, 28 guests. And there, in room 7, where it had been for months, D. Kresge. 1 guest, permanent. Dale was still checked in. I worked at the Welland for 2 more months after that. I serviced the rooms. I read the names. I heard the sounds. I left towels and soap and adjusted thermostats, and occasionally, late at night, when I stood outside a room and heard the low murmur of a television or the small sounds of someone settling into sleep, I'd say, "Good night." Quietly, the way you'd say it to anyone. The tips accumulated in the jar at my apartment. I never counted them. The pocket notebook filled with names and room numbers and check-in times. The book continued its work, accurate and unhurried. In June, I finished my last class. I'd completed my degree. There was no reason to stay on the overnight shift anymore. I could apply for the jobs I'd been working toward: better hours, better pay, work that used what I'd studied. The Welland had been a holding pattern, and the pattern was done. I gave Garza 2 weeks' notice through Sandy. He accepted without fuss. Sandy hired my replacement through the same online listing that had found me. Overnight desk clerk, part-time, $14.50 an hour, quiet environment. A kid named Marcus applied and was hired within the week. I trained him on the computer system, the walk schedule, the vending machine that jammed, the heating unit in room 21 that rattled. I did not train him on the guest book. I left it on the desk, in its usual place, closed. On my last night, I did my final walk at 5 a.m. I went slowly. I passed every door. I heard the sounds, not in every room, but in many. Faucets, creaks, the click of a lamp, the small, undramatic evidence of occupation. I said goodnight to each one. I left the corridor lights on a little longer than usual. At 6:45, I sat at the desk for the last time. I opened the guest book. I turned to that night's page. 28 entries, 28 rooms. I read every name. Then I turned to the next page, the page for the following night, my first night off, Marcus's first night on. It was already filling in. The first entry was there in the same precise handwriting. Room 11, El Morro. One guest, 1:40 a.m. They would go on. The guest book would keep its record. The rooms would be occupied. The motel would do what it had always done. Take in travelers, give them a room, let them rest, log their stay. I closed the book. I left the pen holder in its place. I gathered my jacket and my pocket notebook, and I walked out the front door into a cold gray morning. In the parking lot, I stopped. I turned and looked at the building. 2 stories, 28 rooms, exterior corridors. The sign by the road said Welland Motor Lodge, and below it, in smaller letters that I had never really paid attention to before, the word vacancy. I looked at that sign for a long time. Then I looked at the sign below it, the smaller one, older, partially obscured by the main sign's frame. I'd driven past it every day for months. I'd never read it. It said, "No vacancy." Both signs were lit. Both were on. They had always both been on. I drove home. I set my pocket notebook on the kitchen table. I put the jar of folded $2 bills in the back of a cabinet. I showered and went to bed and slept the way you sleep after a long shift. Heavily, completely, without dreams. 3 weeks later, I started a new job. Office work, daytime hours, the kind of thing my degree was for. Normal. I didn't think about the Welland every day. Some days, I didn't think about it at all. But I still have the notebook. And sometimes, late at night, when I can't sleep, when the apartment is dark and quiet, and the building around me makes its small, settling sounds, I open it and read the names. L. Morrow, E. Palick, F. Durst, M. Cahill, R. Day, K. Weiss, D. Kresge. I read them the way you'd read a list of people you once worked with. People whose faces you never saw, but whose habits you came to know. People who needed a room for the night and found one and were recorded. I think about Dale sometimes, about his notebook and its last entry, about room 7, permanently occupied, about the $2 under the remote. I think about Marcus, too. I hope he opens the book. I hope he reads the names. I hope when he hears the faucet running in a room the computer says is empty, he doesn't panic. I hope he understands what I understood, what Dale understood, what Sandy refused to understand. That the motel is full. That it has always been full. That the guest book is the only record that tells the truth. And I hope he leaves towels. That's the thing I keep coming back to. Not the impossibility of it. I've made my peace with that. Not the fear faded, honestly, faster than I expected. What I keep coming back to is the towels, the soap, the thermostat. the lamp left on for a late arrival. The small, ordinary acts of care extended to people you cannot see, for reasons you cannot justify, in a place that runs on procedures that don't account for them. The Welland Motor Lodge is still operating. I drove past it last month on my way to Erie. The parking lot had 5 cars in it. The vacancy sign was on. The no vacancy sign was on. The guest book was visible through the front window, sitting on the desk in its usual place. I didn't stop. I didn't go in. But I slowed down, just for a moment, as I passed. And I looked at the building, all 28 rooms, both floors, the corridor lights glowing in the dark, and I thought, full house tonight. And then I thought something else. Something I haven't been able to stop thinking since. I thought about my apartment, about the sounds my building makes at night, the creaks, the settling, the occasional footsteps above me that I attribute to neighbors, about the lease I signed with my name in a book at the management office, about the fact that I have never actually seen the tenant in 4C or 2A or the corner unit on the 3rd floor, but I have heard them, faucets, footsteps, the creak of a bed. I thought about the management office and whether somewhere inside it there's an older ledger, one that doesn't match the digital system, one with more names than the building officially holds. I thought about whether the guest book at the Welland was unique, or whether it was simply honest, whether every building that houses people keeps 2 sets of records, the one that accounts for the living and the one that accounts for everyone. I don't open that thought very often. It's the kind of thing that, once you let it in, changes the way you hear your own walls at night. But it's there. It sits in the back of my mind like a ledger on a desk, closed but present, waiting to be read. The $2 bills are still in the jar in my cabinet. I counted them once, by accident, while cleaning. There were 46 of them. $92. I put them back and closed the cabinet. Last week, I came home late. The building was quiet. I unlocked my door and stepped inside, and stood in the dark for a moment before turning on the light. And in that moment, that brief, still moment, I heard something from the apartment next door. 4B. The unit that, as far as I know, has been vacant since I moved in. A faucet running. 5 seconds, then off. I turned on the light. I set down my bag. I stood very still. Then I went to the linen closet, took out a clean towel, and hung it on the outside handle of 4B's door. In the morning, the towel was gone.